Hello there and welcome to Locked In Conversations. I'm Charlotte Gibson and this week I'm joined with guest speaker Alana Rae.
My first question to you, Alana, is how has the role of women in the workplace changed over the last generation?
So I think that's a really good question, and I feel probably like I can only speak from my own experience for part of that, because I think really women in the workplace everything's changing constantly at the moment and so much faster. I think things have really accelerated in the past few years particularly, and we seem to see some of these kind of step changes, in the space of a couple of years with new graduates coming in, things like that. But I often talk to my mum and other kind of family members who have had, careers in different industries, different areas, and talked about some of the challenges that, they maybe found when they were starting off in their career. My mum in particular actually worked in a very, very male-orientated industry. It was the kind of transport industry, and she was the first kind of regional branch manager. And some of the stories she tells me about some of the kind of discrimination and, the real fight that she had to have throughout her kind of early stages of her career, I suppose, have made me feel like actually I think I probably have it quite easy, but make me quite proud in terms of, I think, some of the changes that we really do see now, and help me to think about actually how can I look towards the future and perhaps shape some change, for some of our kind of the younger generations to follow as well.
So as I mentioned, we've come so far from sort of, 15, 20 years ago even. What do you think are the main blockers or barriers for women in the workplace nowadays?
It isn't necessarily always, a physical barrier. Yes, there's conscious and unconscious bias, I'm sure, from a gender perspective. But I think organizations have actually done quite a lot to address some of that imbalance. And what I, again, I'm quite passionate about is really trying to look into ourselves and think, what are the things that actually stop me from progressing in my career? So if I take everybody else out of the equation, if we're looking at all things equal, what can I do to help me in my career progression? How can I get rid of that little voice inside my head that tells me maybe you're just not quite good enough to do that? And, imposter syndrome, and there's so much information, so much content out there on things like imposter syndrome. But I think that really is real. I think women, generally speaking, will need to feel like they're 110% qualified for a role, rather than actually maybe they're 80% there, 70% there, and they're going to give it a go and they're going to put themselves out there. And so that's something I think for me, I've really identified, and I'm trying to shift when I look at my career progression, and I'm working, with some like-minded colleagues as well to help them to try and think about, are there some barriers that they have themselves that they can work on that are going to help them in their career progression. And then of course, working with the business to make sure there aren't, more practical barriers. But I think looking into yourself, and understanding what can unlock some of those doors for you, I think is a really, really important aspect of this.
To what extent do you think gender or sex discrimination still exists within the workplace today?
That's a hard one, and it's not something I think, we want to be negative of or forget the progress that we have made, over the past, 20, 30 years and longer. Of course, there's discrimination. And I think we've talked a lot recently about bias and unconscious bias. And so I think where we've seen a real change has been probably outward discrimination. I've seen a real change, I suppose change in language as well, and a real will for people to feel comfortable about calling out and making noise if actually they see something that they think is discriminatory, whether that's gender, race, sexuality, really any of these different areas. And so I think that there is a safety in that, that I think people generally are feeling more comfortable about saying, actually, no, I don't think that's the right way for me to be treated. But I do think there's been a change from that kind of outward discrimination, and people are learning. People are, I think, really want to be able to make sure that they are treating people fairly in the right way and amending their behavior. So a comment that to a certain individual wouldn't necessarily be meant to be derogatory or discriminatory, they're happy to kind of hear somebody else's voice and then adapt their behavior. Somebody says, actually, I don't think that's quite right. So I do think discrimination's still out there, but I very much see that we're on the right path and the right journey for that reducing significantly. These things don't change overnight, they take time. But again, within the past year or so, I think we've moved a lot further forward in this space.
So what advice would you give your 21-year-old self? What do you wish you would have known at 21, which you now know about navigating your career?
It's so hard to kind of try and pinpoint one element. I wish I'd had a bit more confidence in myself at a younger age. I think I was focused on some of the micro elements and actually really taking a step back and looking at a kind of wider picture and investing more in myself from a personal development perspective. And I think we talk about career paths, career trajectories, these kind of things, and very much job to job to job. But the personal element can often be left out of that. And I think it's so important to understand, not just from a technical aspect, what technical things I need to take off to be able to do this job, but actually those personal skills, whether it's, management experience or training or, negotiation handling, conflict handling, those types of things that over time you learn as part of your career, because you end up in situations where you maybe get things wrong and you learn from those and you move on. But I think taking that interest and a deeper understanding into myself and really where my strengths and weaknesses are, and trying to understand the things then from a personal level that I would, like to work on. I'm potentially in this day and age relatively unique in that I've only worked for one organization. And I've had multiple roles within that time. But it is also different when you're growing up in one place. And so I think that really does kind of changes the journey as well as you're going through. So you're learning and evolving and moving into different roles and trying to learn new skills. So yeah, it's been a good 9 years. I think the age thing actually is interesting. We talk about gender and some of the insecurities that, we as women can sometimes feel within our career progression. And I think the age thing sometimes plays into it as well, into those insecurities. And is there a right age to do a certain role? No. Is there a right amount of time to garner certain amounts of experience? No as well. And so I think I would also encourage women to break down some of those barriers too. Don't tell yourself that you haven't had enough time or experience to do a certain role. It's about you as an individual and what you feel like you can bring, regardless of your gender, regardless of your age, regardless of your sexuality or race. I would want to encourage myself to think about those things too.
So my last question to you, Alana, is what top tips would you give the women who are watching this video today?
To have that confidence in yourself. Don't let that little voice inside of you with negativity and doubt stop you from moving forward, being brave, putting yourself forward for things. Surround yourself with a group of like-minded women or men who can be your supporters, who can really help you, give you that confidence when you don't have it sometimes. And we all don't have it sometimes, regardless of your level. You can be in year one of your job, you can be a CEO of a company or organization. That seed of doubt fits in sometimes, but don't let that stop you. You've got so much value that you can bring. Invest in yourself, take that time to understand where you're at, where you want to go, make a plan, and you will absolutely get there, but believe in yourself because you can do it.
That's been Locked In Conversations. Thank you so much, Alana. Really appreciate your time today. See you next time.